Welcome to the NASIG session, Transforming Print Collections and Supporting Student Learning with Collection Mapping, presented by Arenthia Herron from Florida Southwestern State College. Please refer to SCED for a complete biography of the speakers. Please also participate in our online forum, which can be located at the NASIG website with questions or comments about this session. These links are provided below this video. NASIG's Code of Conduct applies to all discussion on the forum. Please tweet about this session using the hashtag NASIG2020. We would like to thank the NASIG sponsors for helping us make our online conference freely available.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get my slides going, if I can see which screen. There we go. And I'm going to pop up my notes and get those on my other monitor. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining me today and listening to what I have to say about transforming library collections and supporting student learning with collection mapping. So my name is Arenthia Herron, as was stated earlier. I am head of print collections. I'm also the OER librarian and the newly elected chair of libraries, which is a new position for us. So hooray for having a new position going, in a pandemic. It's been an interesting summer thus far. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So I just wanted to share an image of what our campus looks like back when we still had students on campus. So this is our main campus on, in Fort Myers in Lee County in Southwest Florida. Just a little bit of background on our campus to give you some context for, our collection needs, our student body, things like that. So we started in 1962 as Edison Junior College. We have 3 campuses and a center. And as you can see from our little service area map over here, we do serve a 5-county area in, again, Southwest Florida, as our name now reflects. We had a name change in 2014, although the community still refers to us as Edison State College, which is kind of funny. We are primarily associate's degree granting institution, though we do have some 4-year degrees. And we are a member of the Florida College System, and we are an open enrollment institution. So that means that a lot of our students come to us underprepared for college. Perhaps they couldn't get into one of our university system schools in Florida, so they come to us, and I love the idea that we're open enrollment because it really is inclusive and gives a lot of access to people that otherwise may not have access to school. Just a brief look at our enrollment data from this past fall. We have about 5,000 students for our full-time enrollment, and our overall enrollment, including online students, sits at about 16,600. So we have quite a few students across our 3 campuses and center. And as you can see, with our top 10 primary majors, our general AA degree, so that Associates of Arts in what we call general studies, is our most popular degree program at FSW, followed then by our Associate in Science and Nursing. Our health profession school is probably our most popular school in terms of degree granting outside of that general AA degree. And then just a quick idea of some good stuff that comes out of FSW. Our dental hygiene program has had a 100% pass rate on their national boards for the past 17 years. I always say that that's so impressive, but also must be nerve-wracking because who wants to be the first student to mess that one up? And our radiologic technology program is also nationally ranked and has a really amazing pass rate for their certificate program. So a brief overview of the libraries at FSW. We have 4 library locations, so we do have an active library on every single one of our sites for Florida Southwestern. We have 8 full-time librarians spread across those 4 sites, with most of them being at the Lee campus because that's where we have most of our enrollment. This is a picture of my, once was my home away from home, and I'm desperately missing it. That's the library there on the Thomas Edison, or the Lee campus as we call it. That's our mothership. It's kind of the central processing library for all of our other libraries. We have an operating budget, including staffing and everything, of about $1.5 million. And we are a member of the Florida Academic Library Services Cooperative, which is a great opportunity for us to be able to get databases, ebooks, things like that at a lower rate because we have consortia pricing. So although most of you are probably librarians and deal in collections, I just wanted to make sure that we're still speaking the same language. So I wanted to talk to you about how I kind of define collection mapping collection management and development. I'm sure it's the same way that you do, but again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to how we're talking about these two processes for the library. So collection management is withdrawing and maintaining resources. I have some criteria listed that we use at our institution for withdrawing materials. I'm sure this is standard across librarianship. Physical condition, of course, that's probably the easiest one to do when it comes to weeding, those nasty worn out books, as I have a picture over here of the 2 Charles Dickens novels that we took out for condition because, ew, nobody wants to take those home. Relevancy, which is a really interesting criteria there. So that can be both specific to the discipline. Is this still relevant? Is this still how we talk about this particular scientific theory? I always think of, Pluto isn't a planet anymore. So if this book says that Pluto is a planet, is that really relevant to the discipline of astronomy anymore? And then also relevancy to our college curricula. As we went through our collection, we found that we had collections or books in the collection that related to curricula that was no longer taught at the college. So we had some stuff for like hospitality and journalism, things like that, programs that had been discontinued. So relevancy can have a multifaceted bend to it there. Age, duplication, new additions, and also circulation statistics. If you've ordered that new shiny book in 2010 and you pull a shelf report and it says it's never circulated, by 2020, that thing is 10 years old and it's never left your shelf. It might be time to let it find a new home. And collection development is just, it's not just selecting materials, but in its most basic form, it's selecting materials. Again, I just have the criteria that we most often consider. Who's the publisher? Is this a scholarly publication? When was it published? Is this the most recent edition? Price, which is unfortunately becoming more and more relevant, especially in this pandemic, or I guess we're still in the pandemic, absolutely. So yeah, so in this pandemic world that we're in right now, we're going to see some budget cuts. So price is unfortunately going to be a big driver in what we are allowed or able to purchase. Again, relevancy, the same idea. Is this relevant to both our curriculum and the discipline? And then duplication. I'm sure you've all gone up to the stacks before and seen that you have 5 copies of the exact same book and wonder how that happens. So this is like our Christmas time, I always say, whenever we get a huge order in all at once and have it sitting out there. I always like to put those pictures on our Facebook page. I don't think our students care about it as much, but the faculty at least get really excited about it. So why are collection development and collection management so important? Well, for us, when we first started to look at our print collection in 2014, really start to look at it with a serious focus, 57% of our print collection was 15 years or older. So our collection had really started to age, and we really saw that reflected in a lot of different ways. Also, our accrediting is SAC-COC. That's the regional accrediting body for degree granting higher education institutions in the southeastern states. They have an actual standard for accreditation that relates to libraries and providing adequate learning and information resources, services, and support for its mission. And in their handbook for that standard, they do say that you can use certain things for supporting documentation, including a description of your library collections in terms of the programs and the levels of the programs that are offered at your institution. Again, we're mainly a degree granting, and we do have a couple of 4-year degrees, so we're not looking at having a mission that supports graduate level research. We do try to support faculty research, but we mainly do that through interlibrary loan. We just don't have the space or budget to develop a print collection, e-collection in terms of monographs that support faculty research. Collection development policies and evidence of implementation is also one of those documenting documenting pieces for this standard, as well as how our institution's library-related resources support the overall institution's educational, research, and public service programs. So these are things that, as you'll see as we go on in the presentation, that we were kind of lacking in hard evidence of how we support these. So here are the 4 points that I'm going to share about why FSW really needed a focused collection plan. We knew we had a very large collection, but our circulation was very low. And that's the first point that I'm going to talk about here. As you can see from this bar graph, that goes for 2 academic years before we started in 2014, 2015 with this project. We had a whole bunch of titles, and not a lot of those titles were going out. So we knew something was going on one way or the other with our circulation, with our collection. I'm going to share with you some of our embarrassing horrors from the stacks. I think that other librarians always like to say that horrors have been pulled off of other people's stacks to make them better. So I will definitely make you all feel better about your print collections. So yeah, our collection was in just not great shape. We just hadn't had the time or librarian power to really look at our collection very closely until I came on board on the main campus. I actually started working at the center to begin with, and then got transferred to the main campus and was able to come in and really get to the collections. So you can see we have ants stuck in the vinyl covering for one of our paperback books, though I think that the mystery stains on this Ghost Stories book make it more mysterious and haunting. Nobody wants to take that home. And then we have this copy of The Hunchback of Notre Dame that is completely worn and scruffy and gross, and there's no reason that we get a cleaner, nicer copy other than we just were not paying close attention to our print collection. Our collection was out of date. I've got a couple of great examples of some old stuff that was sitting there. This is How to Teach Police Subjects. One of our 4-year degrees is in public safety administration, so we have a lot of people looking to get into the criminal justice field who are taking classes in procedure. And this book has the recommendation to use flip sheets, and what I love the most is it says moving picture films instead of movies. So you can see just how out of date this particular title was. And then this one, it now lives in my office because it was just so bad. You know, you just come across things sometimes that are so bad, you just have to hang on to them. And this one was talking about mental health for students, and it focused a lot on the female student, and it was published in 1966, and talks about how if you want to have a career, you may find yourself alienated from men because you have you know, gotten rid of your feminine role, and that your marriage should not take precedence, or that your career should not take precedence over your marriage, and a whole bunch of other crud that nobody needs to read. And I would be horrified if one of our students had picked this up and had taken any of it to heart other than just to laugh at it as a relic from the past. I won't even get into what it says about dating. So you can see we had poor condition, things were out of date, and then in 2012, we had our on-site review from SACS, which again is our accrediting body. And the library reviewer made the recommendation that we should have a more focused and clear collection management and development policy, and he absolutely was right in that. We had very little weeding happening. It was mainly something would come across to our poor circulation staff, and they would see it and say, this is disgusting, do we really need to keep it? And for collection development, we were going through the Library of Congress classification system and just ordering books based on that. And once we hit the end of it, we would start over again. So there was no real systemized look at the collection or curricular needs. So while we were ordering new materials, we weren't looking at making completely thoughtful purchases based on what our student needs were. So we started to fix our collections, and we asked ourselves the following questions. And first of all on our mind was, why isn't our collection circulating? And of course, we first started thinking about, well, maybe it's digital, maybe ebooks have taken over collections, and that's why we're seeing low print collection circulation. However, in 2014, which was the same year that we started looking at our collections, you can see from this study that was put out by Fosseberg that students in their academic reading really preferred to use print. They preferred the access of electronic because it was easier, but they would print out their resources. They were still looking for a hard copy. So in 2014, it didn't seem like ebooks were really the reason that we had low print circulation. Again, it's another one of our shameful books. Low circulation was probably due to the fact that our books were gross and you couldn't find a lot of the good stuff within the gross stuff. So how we started to fix it, once we kind of had an idea of why our collection might not be circulating, is we started to ask if we were supporting classroom learning with our collection, and how are we going to create that collection that students are going to use. So we determined 4 goals for the collection, and the first one we're going to look at is decreasing the overall age of the collection to begin with. So in spring of 2015, I started a massive weeding project. And these, again, just as a reminder, are those criteria that we were using as we went through and weeded. I love this picture so much. I was weeding in the Q's, which is the science section for those of you who may not be academic librarians. And I broke a book cart. My boss was not terribly thrilled that he had to buy a new book cart, but I kind of feel like I'm library legend now because I weeded so much I broke a book. So as you can see, when I say it was a massive weeding project, it absolutely was. We went from over 55,000 titles in 2014-15, and I should say this is our regular circulating collection. This doesn't include our reserves. Down to, in 2017-18, we were down to a hair over 35,000 print titles. I will say I get this question a lot. You know, does your faculty get upset about you weeding? Absolutely. That's why I do the majority of my weeding when I was doing this massive weeding during the summer when a lot of them aren't there. And there were a lot of friendly conversations that went on talking to them about why we weed and the fact that, yes, I understand that this is a very important title to your discipline. We are ordering a new, nicer copy that people actually want to take home without having to wear a hazmat suit to read it. So once we kind of explained to them that we weren't just tossing books for the sake of tossing books, they were more open to that idea. So you can see that we were successful in decreasing the age of our collection. The light blue represents what the age of the collection looked like when we started the project, and the magenta represents where we were as of last academic year. So we have slowly but surely started to decrease the overall age of our collection. I do look at this chart every now and again and remind myself that were this a normal summer, I would be doing some weeding in that 2000-2009 area for sure, because some of those titles are 20 years old at this point, which is hard to believe. Nothing makes you feel older faster than doing some weeding, I think. So you can see that 36% of our collection is now 15 years or older, well, as of 2018. So we've reduced definitely that percentage of the collection that was 15 years or older. So then we wanted to start looking at, once we got our weeding under control and we got the age of the collection at hand, we knew that we needed to start looking at aligning our collection with the college's programming, so the degrees offered, certificates offered, and classroom curriculum. And we wanted to shift away from that subject-driven collection plan where we were just ordering philosophy books here and there. We were ordering, you know, moving on to the next section, ordering sociology books willy-nilly and not really looking at what we were teaching in those areas. So to do that, that's where our collection mapping comes in to play. So if you're not familiar with collection mapping, it's basically a process that provides statistical information, gives you a view of what titles you own, how old they are, how often they've circulated. So while it does give you some data, there's still some human judgment that has to be made there, of course, as Bushing points out in her article about collection mapping, collection management. So it's really great. It's basically a library assessment tool. It has many advantages. One thing that I love about it is you can customize it on the scale to fit your library's needs. So you guys might not have a collection that really needs a wide scale look like ours did. You may just want to look at the collections that fall within, let's say, your health professions, your school of health professions, or your sciences or whatever. You can scale this to fit whatever your needs are at getting some good assessment of your collection at the time. It shows you your collection weaknesses, allows you to plan for budget needs. So if you start pulling out areas and you say, oh, we really need to, we have some older materials in this particular area, we really need to focus some budget allocation for this particular section, the sciences or whatever. It's really nice to be able to plan ahead of time for that. And it allows you to advocate for your library to show, hey, we are meeting student needs here. Look at how many times the books in this particular collection have circulated. So in our case, when we started our collection mapping, we wanted to assess how well our collection mapped our programming and our curricula, because that goes to one of our 4 goals that we laid out. So we started at looking how well the collection supported specific programs offered by the college. So in other words, we started looking at our 4-year degrees, our AS degrees, so it's Associate in Science, and our certificate programs. I actually got the idea for the format that we started to use for our collection map when I was looking through an old textbook that I still had from library school. It was Johnson's Fundamentals of Collection Development and Management, and it had some really great examples of collection maps in the appendix, and I started to use that as our jumping off point. So hooray for holding on to old textbooks, they can be helpful. So for the program-specific collection maps, and I'll show you all what our finished product looked like. We collected information about the program. We wanted to know our enrollment numbers because that helps you to judge if the size of the collection serves the size of the student population. If you have a really, if you have what is the word that I'm looking for? If you have a program that has a smaller, like a controlled amount of people that they allow in, limited access, I guess. Like I know our nursing program does, and I think our cardiac respiratory program does as well. If you have smaller enrollment in those programs, but you have a gigantic collection, maybe you don't need to worry about allocating as many funds to purchase more titles for that unless you need to be updated. But if you have a huge program and you have few titles for that, it gives you a good idea of kind of if you're matching what those students may need and allowing access. We also looked at the accrediting bodies and their requirements, because a lot of our programs, especially in health professions and like paralegal also come to mind, have their own, outside of our regional accrediting bodies, they have their own specific subject accrediting bodies. So we want to make sure that we're not tossing books that they need as part of their accreditation, and that we're keeping up with current editions of things and stuff like that to make sure that they pass their accreditation. So we began by looking at subject areas covered by the programs. So for, let's say, public safety administration, we started looking at, what's being taught in those courses. So a lot of social sciences relate to that particular discipline. So we started to then, well, what part of the Library of Congress subject classifications relate to that? So then we tied the H's to that particular program. And then we ran some good old shelf reports that identify for those identified Library of Congress classifications. And again, I'll show you what all this looks like, and it'll make a little more sense to see it in front. And again, just because I wasn't sure if we were all on the same page about classification ranges in terms of being academic librarians, this is kind of how Library of Congress breaks down something like education. So depending on the program that we were using, we were looking at, we would either get super specific and get into the subclass of the subclass, or we would just go with the subclass. And then this is what the shelf reports that our LMS will pull for us. So we have the sub-library listed, the title of the work, obviously the call number, which is helpful if you want to grab it off the shelf, and the number of loans, and then the last date of return, which is really important as we came to learn. You can have, like if you look at number 13 there, it has 8 loans, but the last time one of those returned was 2009. So clearly it was popular at one time, but it's kind of fallen out of favor, probably due to relevancy issues, given that it's a science. Okay, so let me click on our collection map and show you what it looked like when we finally went through all of our programming and got that finished. So this was 2015. We have our table of contents, and we broke it down by each school that we have at the college. And then from each school, we broke it down by each degree. So you can see for the School of Business and Technology, we have the Bachelor of Applied Science in both Public Safety Administration and Supervision and Management, go into the Associate of Science degrees, and then our certificate programs as well. So you can see that we did that for each, have an introduction, kind of the state of the collection and the college at the time that we did this project. So you can see what our first collection map looks like right here for Public Safety and Administration. We have the degree offered, the accrediting body, which is just our standard accrediting body. They don't have a special outside accrediting body for this particular program. We wanted to make sure that we had which campuses these programs were offered at, because that helps inform collection development. We don't want to have a whole bunch of public safety and administration books on, let's say, our Collier campus, because it's only offered on Lee and online. And that also gives us an idea of, that we may need to also look at e-books, even though we're just looking at print, but we also have to remember we have an online component to this. So when we're allocating funds, that we need to make sure we look with an eye towards our online students as well. So you can see that when we first did this, we have the title count, we have the subject area. Each librarian was assigned a grouping of programs to do. So they were responsible for assigning the subject areas as they felt were appropriate. It was just a way to make this manageable and for it to not all fall on the collection manager, which was really great. So I collected them all. I put the document together. I kind of answered questions. I facilitated. But when it came to actually assigning subject areas and things like that to the specific programs, the librarians were left to do that. So then we have the title count. As you're going to see when we move into our next iteration of collection mapping, we added an extra column there to give us a little bit more information that was a little more useful to us in making some decisions. Okay, so I just have the directions kind of listed out here, how we did this. I should back up. Once we finished programs, we knew that we needed to look at those general education courses, which are what any of our students that are going into any of these programs would be taking, but also our students that are getting that AA degree, that general studies associate's degree. They all have to go through this general education path. So we knew that those were very important to look at in terms of our support of that curriculum, but it was difficult to wrap our brains around how we were going to do it. So we started looking at the college catalog, and we identified what those core classes were. So our students have a set of core classes that they have to take in different subject areas. They can choose from the core classes, and they have to take a certain number of credit hours. I'm sure it's very similar at all of your institutions. And then they have electives that they can choose from as well. So we decided to stick with the core just to make it manageable, and then link general electives to the class. That'll make sense in a minute, I hope, when I show you an example from our gen ed collection mapping. I went through, and this was a huge undertaking, but the librarians who were working on these areas really appreciated it. I photocopied the table of contents from the textbooks for each of these courses, so they could have an idea of what's being taught in the class, content covered, things like that. And then we did the same thing that we did with our previous collection mapping, where we matched subject areas to Library of Congress subject classifications and then ran shelf reports. So we aren't finished with our gen ed collection mapping quite yet. We have finished the humanities section, and we have finished social sciences as well. We're currently working on science, but we have had hurricanes and pandemics standing in our way of getting a lot of this work done. But this is an example of one we have. So you can see we have two core classes right here that are related, Art Appreciation and Introduction to Humanities. Those both cover the same subject areas. And then we stuck all of the electives kind of underneath to show that the collections that we've pulled out here support these classes as well. And we did add this last bit of information, this little last bit of data, the number of loans in the last 5 years, because we realized that it didn't really tell us much to know that we had a certain number of titles. It doesn't tell us about usage. So knowing that we have 599 titles in the painting subclassification under art, that has been loaned out a little over 1,400 times, tells us a lot about that area. We should go in and look at the condition of the books there. We should go in and make sure that they're still relevant. And we should look at maybe enhancing that particular collection or part of the collection because it's used so well, so much. Whereas something like our print media that has 40 titles, but only 8 of those have been checked out in the last 5 years, you know, maybe that's not such an area that we need to focus on so much, or maybe it is. You know, this is where that human judgment aspect of collection mapping really comes into play. Okay. So, when I send out the directions to my librarians who are helping me with this, this is what it looks like for them. They get a template to fill out. So they all look exactly the same when I collect them back from them. And I give them directions to weed materials. So since we have 4 different locations, they get the entire shelf reports for all of the locations. They can weed what's on their campus, but if they see some stuff that looks a little outdated or no longer relevant, you know, whatever, they can highlight those titles, and I then distribute those out to the other campuses and allow them to go through and take a look at those on their particular campus. And then we do ordering based on what we've learned from our collection map. And then for the Gen Ed collection, I definitely wanted them to consider the table of contents for those textbooks to make sure that we're hitting what's being taught in those classes, or what's the general subject area gone over in those classes, and that our collection reflects that. And then also to think about the idea of if this class requires a research project. And a great part of this process has been building a relationship with faculty. So each of our librarians get their shelf list, a template, and then the scans of the table of contents as they work on this project. So what we've seen with this is it's allowed us to target specific degrees and even courses. We've more thoughtfully bought titles for our collection. We have been weeding like crazy, which makes our good stuff more discoverable for our students as they may be just like browsing the shelves. And we've created better partnerships between the librarians and classroom faculty, which has been really important because we're kind of able to communicate what we do as librarians to support the curriculum that they're teaching in the classroom. And we've had faculty being more forthcoming with new additions to curriculum that we may want to look at making some additions for our collections. We have seen by going back and looking at our specific H classification, which is one of those classifications that was initially targeted in the very first iteration of collection mapping we did. In 2014, for some reason, we had huge usage of our print collection in this particular area, and it tapered off afterwards. But we've seen it slowly tick up, and we're definitely seeing the pattern of students are using stuff that's more and more in date. So hopefully that reflects the idea that our collections are more discoverable, that they're more relevant to what our students are looking for. I don't have data from 2017, 2018. We had a bunch of staff upheaval and changes and people moving on. And so we just didn't have the opportunity for me to be able to to get into our wonderful library assistants and have them run data. And you know, that was kind of a bad thing on my part. I have since created a document for what data I need every year to kind of help keep me on track. But, you know, lessons learned as you start new projects. And then for the 2019-2020, that data is represented from August until February, since we closed the libraries due to COVID in March. So our humanities section in Lit 2000, this is one of our general education courses that our students can choose to take from. It's included in our, like I said, humanities, general ed collection mapping. It's a relatively well-used area of the collection, but the books in this section on the Thomas Edison campus were in very poor condition. So this is a great example of how we're thoughtfully reordering books. We withdrew a ginormous, to use a technical term, section of this, or amount of this particular area, and we have only ordered back a fraction of it. And that's because we're slowly rebuilding and thoughtfully rebuilding this with the help of the English department. There's wonderful people that are in our English faculty, on our English faculty. At the end of spring 2019, the English department had a new poetry course that was accepted through curriculum committee, and one of the professors who's going to be teaching the class has partnered with me to help build a better poetry collection and a better literature collection. So I've started ordering a lot of books for this, and the wonderful thing that's come out of this is we are building a more diverse and more inclusive literature collection that reflects not only what's being taught in the classroom, but also our student population. So we have more representation of voices of authors that more readily represent the diverse population we have in students. So again, as I've said, collection mapping is scalable, promotes thoughtful purchasing, allows for budget planning, which we will all probably, unfortunately, come to very much appreciate as we navigate what our future is going to look like post-COVID. And one of the things we've really enjoyed is the connections that it's allowed us to have with our faculty. We don't have subject liaisons. It just doesn't make sense really for the size of our library and the size of our institution, but this has allowed us to make some really great connections with our faculty. And it's also provided us with really great documentation for our accrediting body when we have that next site visit coming up in 2022. We do have an unmet goal, and that last one, increasing student use of the print collection. So as you can see, our print collection has slowly declined in circulation as we've gone through the academic years. And when we ask ourselves the question again now in 2020, is it ebooks? We can see from some research that's been published that ebooks are starting to gain equal footing with print books. At the time that we started the project, it didn't look that way, but more recent studies have shown that ebooks are starting to come into their own. An interesting thing from our institution is that in 2014, when we started this, 68% of our students were 24 or younger. And then in the fall of 2018, that number had grown to 75.2% of our students were 24 years old or younger. So our younger students have, of course, been living with ebooks as part of an everyday choice for them. So they may feel more comfortable using ebooks as academic reading. And then we also started to think about, is it our online education? So we looked at enrollment for our ENC 1101, which is our Comp 1 class, of course, the bread and butter of any library, right? And it's not really for us. In 2014, it was 615. It's only gone to 667 as of last academic year. So online enrollment of our English department really hasn't made an impact in our print circulation. And we can see from other research that's been published from Yale University, they see their print circulation declining as well in all of their patron usage, from their graduate students, their faculty, to their undergrads. And they've seen their ebooks go up and their print collection, their article downloads as well, but their print collection circulation has stayed rather flat. And really what it comes down to, right, as our friend SpongeBob says here, is it's really the internet. That's where our students natively go to find information. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't want to discourage students from using the internet. There's some great stuff out there. So we have to start as librarians thinking about really making sure that the print collections that we do have, making sure that they're relevant to what our students are learning in the classroom, and showing the value of using some of those print materials that we do have. I wanted to share lastly some of our unexpected benefits that we found with our collection mapping at FSW, and that was space. We have a huge problem with space at our main campus library. So once we weeded over 20,000 titles, we were able to remove 2 runs of shelving, and that allowed for us to add 4 more study tables. So this is a picture of our top floor where our stacks are and all of our study rooms are at the main campus library. And by doing this, it allowed us to close the loop somewhat on our student satisfaction surveys, where our students have constantly told us that they need more study room. And they really want more individual study rooms, but of course, you can't really build more study rooms. That's not a very practical solution, nor do we have the space to build them, even if we did have the budget. But we were able to add study tables to give them more open study space. So that was kind of a nice benefit of being able to streamline our print collection. So these are the references that I used for this presentation, and this is my contact information. So that's the end of what I had to share with you all today. I look forward to monitoring the comments to see the questions that you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Arenthia. That was very interesting. And thank you for attending this NASIG 2020 session. The speaker will be monitoring the NASIG forum through June 2020. The links to the forum, SCED, and our code of conduct are below this video. Please tweet about this session using the hashtag NASIG 2020. Thank you.